Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. We're going to continue working on the BMW R1150GS today, and we're going to change the engine oil and also the oil in the transmission and the final drive. Let's get right into it. So I'm going to start by removing the rear wheel, because as part of the service I also want to inspect, clean and lubricate the splines on the final drive. So I'm just using a cord to keep the rear brake on while I'm undoing the bolts, and I'm going to undo them by hand at first because I've never worked on this bike and I just want to make sure they're all spinning free and there's nothing seized or any issues. Bolts look fairly clean. There's some signs of copper grease on them, so that just probably kept the corrosion away. And at this point I realized I forgot to take the rear caliper off. That needs to come off in order for the rear wheel to be removed. So yeah, just unbolt it and hang it safely out of the way. And here's the rear wheel coming off. So I'm going to start by letting the oil drain from the final drive, gearbox and engine. And I'm going to start by taking the fill plug off first, just to make sure it's not seized or cross-threaded or anything. Usually they're not. It's very uncommon to actually take the drain plug out and be left with a stuck fill plug, but still, it's worth being cautious. That oil looks a bit dark, doesn't it? But it's not the worst I've seen. And here's the magnetic drain plug. There's quite a bit of sludge on it, but that's fairly common. You see that on a lot of them if the oil hasn't been changed in a while. So I'm here at the gearbox now, and again I'm going to start with the fill plug first. One thing I forgot to mention is by undoing the fill plug first, you can also inspect the oil level and see if it's correct or not before you change it. In case it's not correct, it's either not been filled properly before, or possibly there's a leak that needs to be fixed first. And here's the old oil coming out. It's a bit dark, but it's fairly clean, it's not too bad. And now I'm taking the engine drain plug out, but before I've done this I've removed the oil fill plug, just so air can get in the crankcase and allow oil to flow out easier. That looks nice, almost makes you want to drink it. In this case I can't get to the oil filter because of the crash bars and dash plate. So I need to remove the bolts for the crash bars, just enough to lower them so I can pull the plate out of the way and get to the oil filter. But to do that I need to remove the fuel tank first. It's always a scary thing for me removing tank covers. Don't know why, but in my mind every time I see a tank cover I'm imagining a very rusty, very beaten up tank underneath that someone's trying to hide. But it's a pleasant surprise in this case. It's a lovely tank underneath in almost immaculate condition. This side cover isn't sitting very well here. It was probably held in place by the tank cover. The tank is held down with just one bolt here and the rubber mounts at the front. That's all we need to remove. Unplug the electrical connector. Now you can see in this case it's missing the quick connect couplings. I don't know whether this bike never had them, which I think it's unlikely, or someone had trouble with them and just removed them, decided just to put hoses with clamps. Which is fine, it's not a big problem. The only thing we need to be careful is as soon as you unplug them, fuel is just gonna pour out. So we need some hose clamps to prevent that from happening. And also don't forget about the vent hoses at the back. Now I can take the fuel tank off and put it in a safe place. I've prepared a soft sheet on my workbench. Now we can see what I believe is the most vulnerable part of these tanks, and it only happens when you take it off and put it back on. If you tilt it too much or are not very careful with it, you actually damage this lip, which is a shame because the rest of it is in very good condition. And now I can just undo the bolts to hold the crash bars up, and because I don't want the front subframe to sag down or just put extra strain on other components, I'm going to put the bolt back in so it holds it in place. And now I can slide the dash plate out of the way and undo the oil filter. And now that the fluids have all drained, I go ahead and clean the final drive a bit, ready to take it off. Undo the lock nut. Now it's important to mention that from factory BMW uses a lot of Loctite on these, which is quite strong. and you're supposed to use heat, a torch right on the bolt, to burn that off before you try to undo it. In case it does have Loctite, it's very likely you're gonna damage the threads if you don't burn the Loctite off first. So every time I undo one of these, I put a breaker bar on it and I proceed with caution. If I feel any resistance or it's fighting me too much, I assume there's Loctite on it and I apply some heat. And I've already checked this before, but it's always good when you see the inside of the swing arm clean and oil free, so nothing's leaking in there. And here I have the final drive of my workbench, and the splines are actually looking pretty good. They've definitely been greased before, which is a good sign. But yeah, I've just cleaned them and I'm applying some fresh grease, and I'm also gonna clean and grease the bearings. They do show a bit of wear signs, but they'll be fine until the next time this comes off. And here is the final drive going back in place. You can see I've got 2 wheel bolts in place, which help me to wiggle the actual hub, which in turn rotates the splines and helps it align easier. And as soon as it's in place, I'm putting the pins in, and I'm gonna go ahead and torque them properly, which I'm gonna show you how to do in a bit. Now before I'm torquing the pins in, I'm also gonna pop this rubber boot back in place. Now in theory you should at least replace these zip ties, but unless they're very tired looking or damaged, I tend to reuse them. And here it is. I'm torquing the outer fixed pin to spec. And now I'm going to torque down the adjustable pin to 9 Newton meters, which just helps everything seat into place. I'm going to loosen it then and torque it again to 7 Newton meters, which is the correct torque for it. So I'm just marking its position so I can verify later that it hasn't moved. And now with a special tool, which is just a socket with a cutout in it, I'm holding the pin fixed so it doesn't move. And I'm just torquing the lock nut to spec. Torque the lower arm bolt to spec. And reinstall the rear wheel. Now I can reinstall my caliper and torque the bolts to the correct specification. Move the caliper side to side just to make sure the slide pins are moving freely. And reinstall the hugger. Right, so I've drained all the fluids, but I can't refill anything at this point because I haven't received my parts yet. And it's getting kind of late anyway. There's just one more thing I want to do tonight, and that's remove the front wheel, because I want to get this tire changed. So I'm going to get this off and that's it, we'll call it a night. So I'm going to undo the spindle bolt first, while the spindle is still clamped by the forks. Undo the pinch bolts, but always be careful because you don't want to break one in case they're seized in there. And now I can gently tap the spindle out. Before I remove it completely though, I still want to undo the calipers and remove them. And here's the front wheel coming out, ready for a new tire. So, it's a new day and I received all my parts. So I'm gonna start by replacing all the old crush washers. I've given the plugs a clean, put new crush washers and installed the drain plugs so everything's ready to be refilled. So start with the final drive drain plug, torque to spec. Gearbox drain plug. Engine drain plug. And I'm ready to put the oil filter on. I believe it's a good idea to pre-fill it before you install it. So I'm putting the oil filter back in. It's obviously buried in there, so it's hard to get a grip on it and tighten it by hand. So you have to use the correct torque spec for it. And go ahead and fill the engine with oil. And when I was inspecting the bike in the previous video, I also noticed a bit of oil leaking or seeping around the fill plug. So it's a good idea to put a new O-ring there as well. Just put a bit of oil on it before you install it. And now it's time to fill the final drive. Just pour the right amount in a container, fill the final drive up, and then I can just double check if I got the right amount, if the oil level is at the bottom of the threads. And there we go, it's correct and ready to put the plug back in place. Now I'm doing it the slow way here when I'm filling the gearbox. I just wanted to measure the quantity and make sure I get it right, but you could just put the tip of the old bottle in here and squeeze it in until you get oil dripping out of it, and you should have the right amount. And now I can put the plug back in and torque it down. Slide the bash plate back in place, refit and tighten all the screws for the crash bars, and that's it, job's done. Now about the engine oil level, I have refilled it slightly, and when I refit the fuel tank I'll start the bike up, let it run for a few minutes, then let it settle and check the level again. I'll probably have to top it up, but yeah, that's it, all the fluids are replaced, except the brake fluid, which I might show in a future video, and of course the coolant, very important on these bikes. And that's it guys, I was just editing this video and I realized I don't have an ending for it, so here I am. But yeah, that's the video over. Hope you enjoyed it and found it useful, and there'll be more on this bike and more on other bikes which I have yet to edit. But yeah, please do subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks for watching.